Hi, everyone, and welcome back to That UFO podcast. My name is Andy, and joined today by a returning guest, a retired police lieutenant and investigative journalist. He is also the co-founder of the Debrief site that many of you will be familiar with. If you're not, get clicking on the link in the description of thedebrief.org. But welcome back, Tim McMillan. Tim, welcome.
Hey, Andy, good to be back, man. Good to see you again.
So July 2023, Tim, was the last time you were on. So that I'm
Wow.
guessing that was just after the hearings with Grusch.
Yeah. That's definitely would have been just after that. And this may be it's probably is the first UFO related podcast I've done since then as well. So yeah, this is the only one I keep showing up on.
Well, yeah, and that's good to have you. Listen, and we're going to get into why you're here. We're going to talk about the UK drone incursions and a few other things, but that's a good place to start then, because a couple of years ago, you were probably more active in the UFO, UAP space. And
Mhm.
since then, your investigative journalism hasn't stopped, but it's maybe segued into other things that are happening. Do you want to just talk about why you've not kind of left the UFO topic, but you're maybe taking a back step?
Sure. Yeah. The whole UFO topic. I mean, that's a great way to describe it. As I haven't left, and I still stay in the loop with it. And in fact, anybody that checks out the debrief knows that we do regularly cover stuff, but that's kind of now fallen a lot onto Micah. Uh, he continues to cover it where I definitely hadn't broken any big investigative stories with it lately. And frankly, it's because the space has become too clouded and confusing right now.
Hmm.
It's very difficult to kind of navigate that space. It's also very difficult to navigate and get good information. Doesn't mean there's not good information out there. Doesn't mean there's not interesting things out there. But sometimes I'll say it's like a UAP fog over the past year. So you gotta kind of let that fog dissipate so that you can kind of see more clear information. Because uh, you know, unfortunately, largely, what we have is a lot of great stories and everything.
Hmm.
And that's where I think I haven't pursued a lot of things of late. I've always got good stuff on the back burner, and I still stay in touch with some really great high level contacts that work on this stuff with the government. Um, but it's can you bring something forward that's not just more cool stories? I think Grush was probably the last really interesting one for me because here you had a guy who's like, here's my name, here's who I am, here's my credentials, here's what I'm stating my name, reputation, and backing, and willing to swear under oath to. And so that's a kind of anomaly. We don't see that very often. So I still come in contact with people who have interesting stories, but for whatever reason, they're not willing to go on the record, or there's just questions about backgrounds. And I'm like, yeah, no, it's such a confusing space. You almost have to be extra cautious right now. So it's not that I've abandoned the topic. Let's just say I'm ultra cautious right now because of everything that's out there in the past year.
That's very fair, and I think in terms of the David Grusch story, that was certainly the last peak we had in terms of UFO
Mhm.
interest. Um, I suppose, do you know what? Do you want to bring forward our chatting about the hearing now, and then we'll get into the crux of it, because we can touch on that if you want. Um,
Sure.
because I mentioned with the recent Senate hearing and congressional hearing, they they underwhelmed mainly for me because the Grush hearing with Fravor and Graves, but Grush's comments were the standout, and his impact, I think, truly went worldwide. And I mention that because the UK media picked it up in a big way. I
Mhm.
know not only myself, but other folks had journalists from broadsheets getting in touch with us, asking about this stuff, going, I'm calling from X, Y, and Z newspaper. I don't
Mhm.
cover this stuff. This sounds crazy. But and there was
Mhm.
a genuine interest there. It was a very short window. I've always said it was about 4 days in the UK. There was a real interest in that story, and it kind of dissipated quite quickly. We've never had that since, and we've not had it with the recent hearings. I think there was a real lack of interest in the UK around those, real lack of interest, which maybe surprised me a little bit.
Yeah, I think, and I'll say up front that I actually didn't watch either hearing. It may disappoint or upset some people, but I knew kind of going into both of them what they were going to be. So I read the fantastic recaps by my colleague Micah Hanks, and I was like,
Mm,
that'll kind of suffice. I'll get all of it because he does an excellent job with that. I don't need to watch them because I'm not anticipating anything big, and I didn't going into it. If somebody asked me with the House Oversight hearing, there was some people ask, "Oh, you're going to be watching? What are you thinking?" Blah blah blah. And I said, "Yeah, did you? Aside from, gosh, his name escapes me at the moment. The gentleman from NASA.
Gold.
Yes, Mike Gold. Aside from him, I said, so we're basically going to, we could kind of title this hearing a bunch of people saying stuff they've already said on podcasts, except this time to Congress. Like, and particularly when you have people, obviously Lou Elizondo's come under a lot of scrutiny in the past year. Not getting into all of that, but in particular, I've said that Lou's been out here in the public for a number of years now. So if he shares something new, like if something new detail comes out in his book or it comes out in the hearing, you got to ask yourself, oh, why didn't you say this years ago? Why are we just now saying like, and that has to be explained, and unfortunately, a lot of times it's not explained. At a hearing, you're not able to ask that question. So, well, why didn't you say this back in 2017? Why are we saying it now? Is there a reason? And maybe there is a valid reason. So that was me. I didn't watch the hearing. The House oversight, for those not familiar with American politics, and some might disagree with it, but that particular subcommittee is largely toothless too. Like they're not. That's why you see the current air director talking to the Intelligence and Armed Services Committee, whereas the Oversight Committee kind of has to beg and borrow to one extent. And I think that was another thing that led into why I didn't watch this hearing is I had some intel that the committee members were actually like reaching out to different places and media outlets, or people be like, "Hey, can you help us find witness?" Like they couldn't find witnesses. So like, oh Lord, this is not. this is going to be it. If they're already having issues. But I think that's because typically your David Grushes or anybody like that wouldn't appear, though he did appear at the Oversight Committee. If you're in that world, okay, like the Armed Services Intel Committee have a lot of authority. They can subpoena people. They are actually the ones overseeing these different component branches. Whereas the Oversight, this is, I hate to say largely political theater, but we saw some representatives selling their UFO shirts afterwards. So.
Yeah. I had listeners, Tim, get in touch with me because very nicely now, people try and help me stay informed with US politics or give me some extra details. I don't claim to be and never will be an expert in it. I probably know more about US than UK politics now just by proxy doing this podcast. But people will get in touch and say a little bit more detail on this congressman or woman or how something works. And there were quite a few listeners who got in touch to say just what you've said, that congressional hearing, it might come across as being, wow, look at all these folks getting together, but they really don't pack a punch in terms of what's required. And Tim Burchett, I spoke with him just after, he more or less said about himself that he doesn't have the backing or the power to get done what he would like to get done or need to get done.
Yeah, no, and they don't. And I mean, when we're talking about, legitimate systems of power, they're even lower on the rung. I'll give you a good example. The Senate Intelligence and Armed Services Committee are kind of the higher end of the rung of who oversees the budget and directions. They're the ones who have implemented different policies and legislation that's gone in place for UAP reporting, or even the development of ARROW and what they're mandated to do. So, they have a lot of power in that space. However, even with that power, for ARROW's, now I don't know if this is still the case under the new director, but under Sean Kirkpatrick, the past director, they had their civilian advisory committee or their kind of review board. Their last line of once they had these anomalous cases, they would send them to them. I forget the exact term for that committee, but they had their civilian review board. But even at the highest rung of where the Intel and Armed Services Committee are, ARROW and the Pentagon refused to tell those committees who was on their civilian board. They said, no, we're not telling you. It's classified. So even these people who had classification. And so I said all that to say that's the high rung of the ladder. Now the Oversight Committee is even lower down. So the ability to say, yeah, no, I'm not telling you anything. I'm not showing up to your hearing. I'm not doing that. They're able to do that. And, a lot of I won't name any names, but a lot of the politicians that are on that committee, even some who didn't show up for that particular hearing, there's some of the more hyperbolic and attention-grabbing kind of politicians in U.S. politics. They tend to have unique takes, even for their own political party's sake. And so it's a bit of a show. I think people kind of, even those who may have been very eager to see the hearings, were probably pretty disappointed to see like Nancy Mace selling T-shirts afterwards and everything. It's like, okay, what are we doing?
So quickly anyway, yeah, I was surprised at that because I felt on the day she was a bit of a star of the hearing as such, given what happened and what we had to hold on to. What she was asking, I think, was at least, what sensible folks in the UFO community wanted to hear being asked. Were there any positives you feel you can take away from what you've heard happened and these hearings even happening? One thing I was told was that it at least keeps the heat on, or the pressure on, at least keeps the conversation public. It might not have had a big impact. And one thing I'll say with that, I asked about the impact from, what happened from the last hearing in July 2023, whereas Grusch's op-ed, where is David Grusch in general? Where are the witnesses and whistleblowers we were going to get coming forward? We haven't really had it. It felt like that hearing happened, and if everyone held their breath at the end of that hearing, we're all still, we're blue in the face at this point, waiting on that.
Yeah, and ironically enough, we talk about what I have or haven't been working on in the UAP space in the past year. What will be coming up, and who knows, December tends to be a pretty busy month for a variety of reasons. So maybe the first of the year, but sometime soon here, I will publish something saying I do know the resolution of the Inspector General investigations of Grusch's claim. So I do know what happened there. Only reason we had put that out yet is providing some more backstory of why they went down this route. I think, why did they come to this conclusion? Because yeah, it'll be interesting. It's sadly, I'll just say it's not going to put any other mystery to bed. Let's put it that way. It may only stoke more intrigue into Grusch's claims, but yeah, I mean, that's probably the biggest one there, and a lot of his claims still linger out there. And the ability to prove his claims or even disprove them, I think, has been kind of silly. I've seen some of the arguments against his claims by Dr. Kirkpatrick or others, and it's like, okay, that's not, we're not real life. Like to suggest, well, I have access to everything, so I checked everything that he said. I'm like, no, that's not. It's not real life, because we know from the Inspector General side what they couldn't check, and so it's like that. You can't really make that statement definitively. So there's still a lot of lingering mystery in the UFO topic when it relates to the government involvement, and I think the frustrating side for both enthusiasts, people like myself who try to investigate objectively what's going on, or anyone who's passingly interested in the topic, is understanding why is that confusion continue to remain. And I don't have that answer, other than it certainly appears that the government, to a certain degree, reasoning, I don't know, enjoys maintaining some of that mystery, enjoys those lingering questions. It serves a purpose for them rather than just dispelling it or providing kind of more hard, fast information.
Yeah, and Tim, I enjoy your reporting, your work, the debriefs work, because it does bring some incredible stories, but a voice of reason to it as well. And if you're always looking for the evidence behind blue avian aliens, in the desert, transporting nuclear missiles on board black triangles or whatever you want to call them, it's maybe not always the conversation to have. And we're going to bring it into the news that's happened recently, and why I've asked you to come on, Tim, mainly. Is we have had now, I'm going to summarize it, 4 US Air Force bases here in the UK since November 20th have had reports, photographs, and videos, which are useful, of alleged, let's just say, objects, drones, UFOs, UAP, whatever you want to call them, over the bases. And this seems to be quite the story. So they are RAF Lakenheath in Suffolk, RAF Mildenhall in Suffolk, RAF Feltwell in Norfolk, and RAF Fairford in Gloucestershire. I'm sure US listeners appreciate not only me reading those names, but enjoying the quaint titles of some of the places we have here in the UK. They only get more mental in Scotland, folks, I can promise you. Regarding these incidents, and we'll come back to why a couple of those bases might be particularly interesting, or at least for someone like myself trying to research this, the US Air Force issued a statement commenting that small unmanned aerial systems continue to be spotted in the vicinity of and over those above bases. They also went on to say, to date, installation leaders have determined that none of the incursions impacted base residents, facilities, or assets. The Air Force is taking all appropriate measures to safeguard the aforementioned installations and their residents. Then on Tuesday, the 26th of November, Major General Patrick Ryder, who is the Pentagon press secretary, said the situation was being actively monitored, taken seriously, and they continue to look into it. And a spokesman for Britain's Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, Shudder, said that the country's armed forces personnel are working closely with the Ministry of Defence police, who are currently leading the UK investigation. So all that to say, Tim, something's going on. There are objects above multiple bases. Do you want to share your thoughts on what you think may or may not be happening here?
Sure. I mean, the first thing I'll say is that with this story, it's really taken off in the past couple weeks or so. You know, large credit in part to the war zone, Tyler Rogaway. I think we first reported the first incidents that were occurring late October or early November, I guess, recent, a couple weeks ago. And so this story's really taken off, and I've watched it kind of take off and somewhat bemusement, because I think one of the things that people don't realize is how frequent and common this is. This seems like, oh my God, what is going on? The UK can't control their airspace. These NATO bases can't control their secure airspace. All this stuff from unmanned aerial systems. And the fact of the matter is this has been going on for years, and it happens quite more frequently than people realize. In fact, I believe NORAD last year alone said there were over 600 drone incursions at just U.S. military installations. So that's, you put that in perspective. How many of those are happening per month at U.S. installations? It's quite frequent. We've had them fairly regularly in the last 2 to 3 years here in Germany over the NATO and U.S. bases. I've reported on some of that for the debrief. Some of the ones we had late, I guess it's coming up on 2 years ago. Maybe it was early this year. We've had so many I can't keep track of them, and we've had them here at the installations that I live on. We've had them at installations nearby, Germany, Aviano in Italy, Poland, Romania. We just prior to these incursions at the UK, there was a rash of almost identical sightings in Brunsbüttel, Germany, which is up near the North Sea, so North Germany. Ironically, only about 300 miles as the crow flies from where we're seeing, the triad of bases there on the east coast of England, and where we're seeing them now. So not even that far. It was September, I believe. We had the same things. These are over nuclear sites in Germany. So this is really common. It's more common than people realize. This story has taken a lot of interest, and we'll get into there's some disconnect between what military officials have said publicly and what they've privately said to me and others, and what the public is saying, what's being said on social media. There's some disconnect there. But I'll just say one of the reasons that I think this particular story has taken off so much, unlike, why haven't you heard about them here in Germany as much? Why haven't you heard about them in Italy, Poland, all these other locations? And that, frankly, we kind of have a perfect storm where these reports were initially kind of brought to light through the war zone, but really through radio scanner, plane spotters, so people who constantly are scanning radio traffic. And you have an English-speaking country and English-speaking planes, who then put it out on English-speaking, English language websites and blogs and message board forums for other plane spotters that you pick it up, where same information gets shared here in German media or foreign media, non-English speaking plane spotters put the same information on forums. It just doesn't jump into the English-speaking media like we see now. So we have the kind of perfect storm of English-speaking media. You're able to get all this information. So that's one reason I think people are hearing more about these than in recent weeks than they have some of the others here in other parts of Europe. But they're not unique to the UK. We've seen this before, several years ago. We've seen some of these. So, uh, you know, this is not an entirely unique event. That's not to say it's not a concerning event. So all of these are concerning. The fact that you're able to get small unmanned aerial systems over these facilities at such regularity that we've seen, not just in the UK recently, but worldwide in all these military installations and other secure sites, it's obviously concerning, but it also speaks to the fact that I don't think people truly appreciate how vulnerable airspace secure facilities are to small unmanned aerial systems. I mean, this is a problem that has been well documented. It's been well reported in military circles. It's been well covered by military experts. We've seen it in extreme violent action in the war going on in Ukraine and Russia, the ability to launch kinetic strikes through these drones. The bottom line is that these facilities are not as secure as people think to unmanned aerial systems. It's not, I've seen to one extent, we'll get into kind of the disconnect where maybe these have been described as more UAP-like events than they necessarily could be. What I have heard from both what the military has reported publicly and what I've heard also has matched what they've reported publicly is that what they've observed are drones, quadcopters, octocopters, single rotary blade drones, not performing at extreme maneuvers, not doing anything that what I categorically call anomalous or what I would call UAP. For me to say UAP, we've got to see either physical characteristics that don't comport with flight physics, so no control surfaces, propulsion, or they've got to be performing maneuvers that don't comport with flight physics. So abrupt stopping, acceleration that exceeds what you would expect with drones. But what I've been told is that that's not the case here. We've just had this drone activity both over some of the facilities and nearby the facilities. And so there is kind of that, lots of people who said, oh, I've seen this nearby, or I've seen it, and I saw it zip off at Mach 10 or whatever the case may be, but that's not what I've heard from the military side. That's not, it seems to be. So there's some concern about the veracity of those. The second thing that leads into the UAP kind of, well, this has to be UAP discussion, is the idea that they're able to fly over these military installations.
Yeah.
I think, Andy, that goes down to people have a bit of a misperception over how secure airspace is, especially in peacetime. I mean, the UK, the United States, we're in at a peacetime to an extent. Obviously there's the stuff in Russia and Ukraine. There's a lot of saber rattling, but there's not. None of these bases have stand-up air missile defense batteries. They're not Patriot missile batteries just out there, scanning the skies at all times. It's just not true. And in fact, obviously the UK has their own air and missile defense brigades and units and systems there. But for the US side, the only air missile brigade, the 10th Air Missile Defense Brigade, is here in Germany. It's in Eastern Germany, closer to Romania. I mean, that's the only one here. So, even if you wanted to deploy, if the U.S. wanted to deploy Patriot missile batteries, they would have to deploy them from that base into the UK, which you're probably not going to see for these kind of drone things. And so there is not this omnipresent, invulnerable air defense that people think, particularly with small unmanned aerial systems that can be launched from a variety of platforms or locations. I think people, when they hear drones, even they're picturing like large predator drones, large kind of drone systems. That's not what I've been told is being seen here. And even your, let's say, non-commercial, so not off the shelf per se, but more high-end quadcopter systems that have extended times, flight times of over 30 minutes to an hour. They're a little larger. They can travel up to altitudes 3,000, 4,000 feet. These still are not, you can transport them in a car. This is not, it's not going to require a runway. It's not going to require anything. These are vertical takeoff lift platforms. Very easily, and I mean, or anybody that's in that area knows how much kind of open space there is. There's lots of fields. There's
Yeah, a lot.
lots of rural space, and that's with all of these bases here in Germany, surrounded by nothing but rural areas. And so it's very easy to kind of launch these systems from a car, fly over the base, monitor, do whatever you're doing, and then fly back. It is not this idea that there is just this blanket coverage, this idea of, well, God, these can't be regular drones, or they just be stopped somehow, which kind of leads into the whole misperception of how you stop these drones. I think a lot of people are like, oh, no, they the UK or the US would just blow them out of the sky. That's not really standard operating procedure.
No.
Now, people have to remember, even if you're firing at these drones, whatever you're firing at, first of all, a drone at several thousand feet in the air with small arms, so rifles, you're not going to hit it, okay? And every bullet that goes up has to come down somewhere.
Yeah.
You got to account for that. Any kind of, if you're going to put up the fighter jets, you're going to fire a missile at one of these. Like, that's not, the collateral damage from that explosion is going to cause more damage. So
yeah,
the idea that you're just going to blow them out of the sky is not, it's just not real life when we're talking about. These are, I think it's important for people to realize, these are military installations that are around civilian areas in a country that's at peacetime. The risk for collateral damage is starting to shoot at these things is far greater than people maybe recognize. It's definitely beyond our capabilities what we have stand on to just be able to start shooting at them.
Yeah, a lot to pick at there, Tim, which is interesting. I think I said to you before recording, and it probably goes without saying, I would love every single incident or report online to be UFO related and be truly anomalous, because I could come on here every single day and talk about this report or this article or this video online, but there's just too much wheat and chaff to sift through. Like you probably said before regarding the higher end of reporting that you do, there's a lot of stuff where you're going, actually, is it even worth digging into this pile right now? So if you then separate this, do you want to go into that?
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I mean, that is a 100% goes in my thought process, and I've told people that is, I try to be very efficient with time, and I would encourage others to do that as well. Which is, what is the probability that certain events are truly anomalous? What is the probability that you're going to be able to get good information on this? And what is the timeline on that? And so, for certain things, you should. I can't tell you how many times, when we're discussing kind of in amongst the debriefs research and kind of writing core group, when I'm like, yeah, why do we want to waste our time on this? Because it's not, even the outcome of this is, why are we spending time on that? And I think the UFO, certainly won't. I won't pretend to understand all the machinations of the UFO community writ large, but I see a lot of time. I feel like people perhaps waste their time on things that aren't going to do anything, unrelated to the drones. I've seen a lot of talk lately about the, like editing Wikipedia pages, and is this a shadowy Mick West? And I had the discussions with people. I'm like, who cares? Like Mick West is a professional debunker. If he wasn't editing Wikipedia pages to provide information debunking UFOs, I'd be like, well, why not? Like that's what.
Yeah.
What do? You prove that Mick West is a debunker, self-described. Like, you wonder why I spend so much time and effort and kind of get into these personal feuds over stuff like that, where the outcomes aren't necessarily good. And so you look at this as well. I've looked at these. I'm interested in them from a military and defense standpoint, but from a UAP standpoint, I haven't seen anything. There's no evidence.
Yeah.
To suggest these are anything but drones. And what I would say to
Yeah, I was going to say, Tim, just before I forget this point, let me come in there because from my point of view, I agree that it can be interesting, but it doesn't need to be UFO UAP. But I'm not going to come on here and talk about, oh, I've seen this defense thing, this when it's nothing to do with UFOs. There are plenty of other defense podcasts out there that would do that.
Right.
The reporting for me seems to be the issue here, where online it seems to be it just gained traction, went a little bit viral, where folks want it to be something, and the stuff that would be interesting is just people saying, for example, I can see loads of videos and pictures, and people send me stuff, which I'm always grateful of. But if it's just a point of light in the sky or a couple of points of light in the sky, there isn't a whole lot you can do with that that goes anywhere. And with anything I've seen of these incidents online, the interesting stuff seems to be here's a picture of a point of light in the sky. Witnesses have said that these things outpaced an F-15. That's where you do have to ask, okay, so these witnesses knew what an F-15 was for a start, and indeed they knew the distances these things were from them. I watched a video just before we hit record of a drone that was going from 0 to 200 kilometers an hour, I'm sure it said, in 0 to 19 seconds. This thing's relatively small, so at certain distances, you could have an F-15 or any jet in the background, and you could have a much closer drone that would appear as a point of light. That thing would look incredibly fast, but it could be nowhere near that jet. Is that fair?
Yes. No, absolutely. I mean, it's darn near impossible to kind of judge that. You've got to know the distances from your observer to the drone object, from the drone object to the aircraft. I mean, there's so many variables you don't know, and it's just the observer on the ground. You're absolutely correct. It's near impossible to see because, like you said, closer it is up to it. A car driving down my street appears to travel from point A to point B faster than the F-16 that's flying by.
Hmm.
But that's not the case. We know the F-16 is traveling faster, but it's just further away and it's relative to the distance you are. So it's very, very difficult to see that. It's not to say that the people who have filmed it or have said, "Oh man, this thing zipped away," much faster than the aircraft or much faster than I would expect. It's not that they're disingenuous. It's not that they're
No.
lying. It's just that where you are as the observer changes that. And I think, I've said this for years because people get very upset when you're like, lots of people got upset when I said on Twitter, hey, these are really common. Like these are drones. This is not a good thing. There's reason to be concerned about it, but associating with UAP, we have a whole other host of explanation. And people tend to get upset by that. And I'm like, look, it's almost as if they need it to be all or nothing. Like anything you can identify in the sky, that is
Yeah.
aliens. And if you argue any other point, people get upset. And I'm like, okay, guys, it's not going to be that. Like we're wasting again. It's about exerting the energy that you want to exert on things where there's meaningful outcomes. And when the Arrow says there's 7% of their cases are anomalous and unsolved, that should be really exciting. I mean, people get
100%. Yeah.
and I mean, that kind of matches what all professional UAP investigations for decades have always said. That there's this small fraction, high end 10%, low end 2% that are really weird. And well, that's great. Like that's where we should focus all our time and energy, not trying to make that other 90% make that weird. Let's just focus on what we really is weird because you only need one. Out of 50 million sightings, if you got one, one video of a flying saucer landing somewhere, and that's all you need.
Yeah.
So why waste your time on things that aren't?
So see on that then, Tim, what I think is also captured some folks' imagination in this conversation has been people. It's really hard to keep up as well when you see so many posts online where people are posting what appears to be a fact. I struggle to fact check everything. I will get stuff wrong. Tim, I dare say at times you have gotten information wrong or not misquoted, but you've miscalculated something, any number of things, right? But people are saying things like these can't be commercial drones. They can't be simple unmanned aerial vehicles because they have GPS and tracking that stop them being able to go over nuclear installations, that stop them being able to go over military installations. So let's go with what is the most likely scenario we are seeing here, and why are what you say quadcopters, solo rotary copters? Why are these things over sensitive bases?
No, the short answer is we don't know. But we have seen them so consistently over military bases and sensitive facilities, both in the continental U.S., in the Pacific, in Europe. We've seen them at such degree of frequency, and oftentimes, in certain instances, much higher quality video, where we're able to say, "Okay, yeah, that's definitely a drone." That this doesn't point to anomalous or unusual extraterrestrial activity and everything. It points to coordinated efforts, largely because, what you just said there is accurate. The off the shelf drones do have GPS that, or gates that prevent from flying over secure facilities. They often aren't able to fly as high or as long as some of these drone sightings are. So these are slightly more sophisticated. These are not your predator drone, but these are more sophisticated, which points to a more sophisticated partner who's involved in it. And that kind of always directs into, especially when these are all occurring against either U.S. interests, U.S. allies, or NATO interest and allies of who it is. We're looking at foreign intelligence services, a foreign military service who's kind of behind that. I mean, that's really just kind of following the logic tree of what we've seen here. And I have followed or watched these drone sightings for several years now. And do we know who's behind them conclusively? Publicly, no. Do we have some pretty good suspicions, both in the military and intelligence community? Yes. And oftentimes, in monitoring when they show up and what they're monitoring, for me personally, I think a lot of the evidence kind of can be traced back to Moscow and Russia, based on what they're looking at, when and why. For example, when we had a similar rash to what is going on in the UK here over a military installation here in Germany that was training Ukrainian soldiers and equipping them. Well, who do we think who do we think's behind that type of thing? Who would have an interest to know what Ukrainian soldiers are being trained and equipped with? Who would have that interest? Russia. They're at war with them. We saw these similar actions occur in Sweden a couple of years ago, whenever they were just getting ready to formally make their proposal to join NATO. We saw these in Sweden, very, very similar to the UK here, where three of the bases you mentioned where there's sightings are relatively in close proximity geographically, but one of them is a good distance away. Sweden, you had this where you had multiple nuclear facilities, civilian nuclear power facilities that were getting these flyovers, and even restricted airspace such as Swedish government buildings. But they were coordinated where at the same time, hundreds of miles apart. So these are coordinated efforts, more coordinated than just your local kid having to get a drone for his birthday and decides, hey, I'm going to go fly it around the base. These are coordinated efforts, which oftentimes point to military or foreign intelligence services being behind them. We had the same thing. I think I mentioned this on Twitter. This has been going on for 10 years. We had the same thing in France, roughly 10 years ago, where they had coordinated drone flights over nuclear facilities over France and over Paris, actually. Same type of things, larger than normal drones, commercial off-the-shelf drones, but not predator drones. And so all of that, to me, really points to a foreign service origin. And for me, oftentimes, because of what's being looked at, because of when they appear, it oftentimes tends to point to Russia. Do I know that for sure? No. China, potentially, although in my experience, China just kind of right up Russia's alley. Russia tends to be a bull in the China shop Russia will smuggle some agents in and try to assassinate people on foreign soil with radioactive chemicals, and contaminate half the city and kill other people in the process. China tends to be a lot more subtle. Obviously the Chinese spy balloon, everybody maybe is familiar with,
Yeah.
would be an anomaly there. But in talking to some intel people there and just looking at that actually, um, the Chinese government screwed up there. They didn't intend to fly it over as low as they did over the continental U.S. There were some atmospheric conditions, some pressure systems that lowered that particular balloon and actually forced it over CONUS. So there's plenty of evidence they didn't mean to do that. Usually China is much more subtle, but where Russia is not as subtle.
Is it fair to say, Tim, that, and you're bringing up a lot of good points here, and I'm going to miss some of them, unfortunately, but that a lot of these incidents, the US and the UK will be doing similar in China and Russia and North Korea and multiple other countries?
Sure. Yeah. It's I don't see as much. So it's hard to know what. I guess you're saying, does the U.S. and the U.K. and other countries do the same things to Russia and China? Is that the question? Yeah.
Well, yeah, and I even include spy balloons or drones over
Mhm.
sensitive facilities here.
Oh yeah, yeah. Everybody spies on everybody. The U.S., U.K. Um, ultimately it comes down to the fact that really the Western kind of powers, we'll just lump it in because with NATO and everything, we work together so much. And the Five Eyes, bringing Australia and Canada in the mix. Um, there's a lot more sophisticated surveillance technology, so they're able to do stuff from space or near space with satellite systems or these space planes, these secret space planes, where they're able to get by. Everybody's spying on everything. The US, the UK tend to be a lot more subtle. um, I've not seen any from Russian press or Chinese press where you've heard of drone incursions similar to this. You don't see these in those countries. Uh, doesn't mean it's not going on. I mean, that's one of the difficult things is when you're talking about countries like Russia and China, they control their media space. They have total kind of control. And so
Yeah.
did they just not report it? And there's certainly some reason that they might not report it. I don't think, even with the UK and US here, I don't think if these most recent incidents aren't picked up by plane spotters listening to radio traffic, the US is not going to come out and say, "Hey, everybody, we've had this going on." What they usually do, and I know this firsthand from being on a foreign military base, is they usually just put out an advisories, email, something like that. Hey, remember, drones are illegal, and if you spot one, call security forces. They don't put out a full court press like we see here.
So on
But
that,
yeah.
Tim, that's perfect the way you've said that, right? Because this is something I wanted to get at. This has come out because the public have spotted this. It's been reported, social media, and in the UK, in the US, people are far more laissez-faire, whatever you want to call it, with their cell phones, and they'll film this stuff and go, here it goes online, and bang, the usual outlets pick it up. That doesn't happen as much in Russia and China, given the nature of those countries. And that then would go to make sense to me that the US and the UK would likely know more information as to what these things are, have a very good idea, like you say, very strong suspicions these are Russian, Chinese, whatever they might be. But it makes sense that they have a public facing conversation. And again, this is me from a layman. If that was me, I'd be going, yeah, we keep the public as we don't know what these are. We're monitoring the situation because that's all they need to know. In the background, we're going, yeah, Moscow have had another container ship offshore, launch a load of drones, and these things have flown over multiple bases. We're keeping an eye on it. All we're doing is we're gathering data on them. And it reminds me of was it the Omaha incident that had the triangular
Mhm,
UAP,
mhm,
which we heard about, and this is the first time I learned about Snoopy teams and ships
mhm,
going dark, where
mhm,
essentially an adversary launches drones over at US Navy fleet. They go dark, turn all the lights off. They send a team out that is specialized to go onto the deck and they gather data. So what you have is an adversary in the air using drones or unmanned aerial vehicles gathering data on the US fleet, and the US fleet is also gathering data on them. And it's a little bit of stalemate where the others want to see what the others want to do. first,
Yeah.
who's going to move first. And this, for me, just looks very similar.
Yeah, no, very similar. And for the countries employing it, and this is another reason why I go back to Russia being my number one suspect, because it just comes out of their doctrine. It comes out of their how they like to operate. That these types of incidences are really all win scenarios for them. And so, because it raises the question, why? Why are they doing this? What what is the plan, and why do this? Well, part of the strategic benefit here is that question right there. Why? You just create. Russia's very good at creating these. What the hell are they doing? kind of scenarios, and so they do these things, and it's a no lose situation for somebody. Let's say Russia. For the sake of argument, this is Russia. Why are they doing this? Why would they be doing this over this basis? Well, there's a couple of reasons, and all of them benefit them. They don't lose out on any of this. One, you could be just gathering intelligence, gathering information that you wouldn't normally be able to get a hold of from airborne assets, i.e., satellites. Because the bad thing about satellites is they're fixed points in their orbit. We know when they're coming by. So don't forget, don't leave out this material. Don't do this. Don't leave out this platform or plane because we know we got a Russian satellite be coming in about 30 minutes. That we know. So we can monitor those. So to a certain degree, the spy satellites, you are able to get an idea, and you don't have any maneuverability with those spy satellites. So you can't stop and slow down, zoom in type of things. You only get fixed pictures. So you launch it up for airborne intelligence. You're able to get image intelligence, space layouts. Is certain assets been moved recently? Is there certain aircraft on the tarmac that wouldn't normally be there? You could also potentially get signals intelligence. So if they've attached different collection devices, payloads on them that can kind of soak up emissions, is what it's called, so different signals. So it's giving us an idea of what they're doing over there. You have that component, and certainly that is one reason, but that's probably not the sole reason, because there's actually much better ways to go about these military bases. I guess for the majority of people, especially, and it may be like this in the UK, and it may not be. In Germany, it's very much like this, where the local Germans are fascinated by the NATO US bases because they can't get on. So there's always Germans like, I just want to go eat at the restaurants, whatever. Whereas I'm always like, man, you'd be super disappointed. It's not. It's really not that cool. It's not that great. But there is this, you can't go in kind of fascination.
Yeah.
But it's not impossible or hard to get on. There's at our base here, there's I don't know how many, well over 100 or more foreign nationals that work on the base. So at the restaurants there's German citizens, or there's foreign citizens, or you have these craft bazaars, or in the BX, the base exchange, which is kind of like a mini mall. There's always tables set up from people from Eastern Europe peddling their wares, selling pottery. So there's ways that these foreign intelligence services can get onto these bases, boots on the ground, and do much more covert intelligence than just flying drones over. I've complained for years. You or your listeners, anybody who's been in the military, in the U.S. military at a foreign base, particularly in Belgium, Germany, Italy. I don't know in the UK, because I don't think I've been to any of the UK bases, but they'll get a kick out of this because you see them all the time. I always say, look, there's absolutely no fucking way that the people who are selling flowers outside the base are making a living selling flowers. Like, it's fucking ridiculous. You go to these bases, there's like a flower stand where people are selling flowers outside the gate. I'm like, that's not real life.
That's not a good business model. Yeah,
no, I don't care. My apologies to any listeners out there who do make a legitimate living selling flowers outside military bases. But I always look at it and go, hey, there's no way you afford to feed your family, because I've never seen anybody buying flowers. But you'll see these flower stands outside U.S. bases overseas all the time. And so there's different ways to get on the base. So technically, just flying these drones over, other than you have the ability to kind of just pop up instantaneously and check it out. So maybe you can check out whether things are moving when the base normally would not want stuff to be seen because there's no satellite coverage. You have that, but it's not covert because these have flashing lights.
Yeah.
People, when you talk about how is somebody able to see that drone's moving faster than a plane? Well, that's because they've got their lights on. So you have to ask, well, that's not being covert about it. Why are you doing that? And so that leads into kind of the second theory, that is, are these doing it? And a good friend of mine, we discussed this recently, and he brought this up. His former intelligence officer in the military. So this was kind of his assessment, is these could be practice runs, proof of concept for the ability to attack bases if needed in the future with small unmanned aerial systems. So basically, you're mapping it out. You've got your target package where you're like, okay, we want to strike the runway, we want to strike these different areas. So now you're just launching these drones. You're saying, all right, within 5 minutes, I can get to where my target needs to be. I haven't been intercepted. I could drop, small munitions here. You're just proof of concept in working out your ability to be able to do this. Because in the event of a major conflict, all of these facilities are going to be vulnerable to that type of stuff. In fact, much more vulnerable than traditional conventional aircraft, bombing run, that kind of stuff. So you have that idea. Are these just doing practice runs? But at the same time, we've seen them repeatedly over and over. And so, all it's doing is bringing in more assets. So now you're just like saying, hey, we can do this. You better bolster up your ability to counter unmanned aerial systems. So that kind of, to me, is inconsistent with just ferreting these bases and running mission sets. And so I tend to lean towards, when you look at it in totality, what these events are, both in the UK right now, past ones that we've seen, is it is in line with something, a portion of Russian doctrine called reflexive control, which reflexive control is you engage in actions, and this is very much written in their doctrine. So this is not just, kind of top secret stuff. All other governments engage in reflexive control. They just don't mention it as bluntly as Russia does. But reflexive control are psychological operations, information operations designed to influence the thinking of a local populace without overtly doing it.
Mm-hmm.
And so for me, these seem very similar to a reflexive control operation, where you're flying the drones, you're showing they're vulnerable, you're showing that the base is vulnerable to those attacks I just previously mentioned. You're raising all these alarms. Well, maybe they're collecting intelligence. So you're causing the bases to bring in more assets. They're bringing counter unmanned systems. And more importantly, you're telling the public. So it spreads to the public news. And it goes back to what you just mentioned with, if it hadn't been picked up by these plane spotters, the government probably would have not mentioned it and kept it under wraps. And that's because, and in fact, publicizing it, bringing it up to the public attention, could very well be serving a big purpose of what they want. And that
Yeah.
is the idea of telling the public, hey, you're vulnerable. Hey, we can do this. Hey, we can control your airspace. Hey, we can, if we want to attack, we can attack, to influence public's thinking. Because a lot of times these incidents will coincide, in particular these UK incidents coincide with both discussions of replacing nuclear armaments on Lakenheath Air Base, and both the United States and the UK authorizing Ukraine to conduct strikes, long-range strikes into Russian territory. And so you have that, and we've heard a lot of saber rattling from these governments authorizing that. We've heard Russia's changed their nuclear doctrine again. They do this kind of nuclear doctrine. And so what does that, when you bring all of it together and you have all these weird sightings and everything, secure military bases being overflown, particularly where we've seen the ones in Sweden, here in Germany, where they're flying over nuclear facilities, it reinforces you're vulnerable, we could strike. And when you're flying over nuclear facilities, it reinforces the concept of nuclear power, i.e. nuclear weapons. And so you're subtly trying to influence the thinking of the public to where, especially with the U.S. having a new, former president that's incoming to be president again, there'll be some political changes. You're hoping that the public goes, yeah, do we want to risk going to a nuclear war with Russia or whatever? Forget this. Let's stop supplying Ukraine with weapons. Let's just abandon them. It's really a way of influencing the public thinking without overtly saying, hey, you guys need to stop doing this. And it tends to reflexive control tends to be a lot more effective because you're subtle about it. You're not obvious. So for me, I tend to lean in that direction. I think if I had to give you my personal assessment, I think that these types of operations that we're seeing in the UK and that we've seen at other ports are just that. They're reflexive control operations. They're Russian operations that are going, hey, let's fly them over. If we get some pictures or images or SIGINT, great. If we cause these governments to reallocate resources, divert attention from other things and focus in on that, super. If it causes the public some trepidation over their own military capabilities and vulnerabilities and the potential, I mean, if you can fly a drone with grenades over a military base in the UK, well, hell, your village, your town is easy pickings. We'll just launch drones. You're vulnerable as a civilian in the event of a war. These are all win scenarios for Russia. Like any one of those that come out as a win scenario for Russia. If you believe that these are alien spacecraft and UFOs and the government's covering it up, another win for us. Because, what's the subtle undertone there is mistrust in government and cover up. And so all of these are win-wins. I tend to think that these are design reflexive control psychological operations than I do actual true purpose intent intelligence collection or potential planning for future strike type option. I think it's more designed to make people question and worry about their own safety.
Yeah, that's a nice summary, and I think as well it makes sense to me that they don't take action on these drones for multiple reasons. You mentioned earlier, you don't shoot £100,000 missiles at a tiny little drone in the air. You can't shoot them with guns and rifles. But also, if you just leave them be, these things are going to go back to a source potentially. You can follow them, you can find out who's releasing them, where they're being released from, and you can do your own kind of surveillance from there as well. I think when we have talked about the UFO UEP topic, like the Tic Tac objects, there were rumours at the time those were being tracked by missile defence systems on the coast that would normally track missiles coming in. So if these objects are coming from a source, you can track them back to the source potentially far easier if you just let them be, wherever that may be, whether in orbit, underwater, or otherwise. So that makes a lot of sense. There's a few listener questions, Tim, on the shootdowns. On the lack of shooting down on the drones and a few other things. But before we get to that, another story that broke in the last day or two, not necessarily related, but it's come up at the same time, was of an orb or round object at least spotted in the skies above the airport in Manchester. It caused planes to be grounded. There's a video of a small round object in the sky. There's a couple of photographs of an object on the runway. One of them's pretty clear and is taken by it looks like pilots in the cockpit of their aircraft, sitting waiting. It wasn't that it happened in the last few days. It was actually back in June the incident happened, but it's only just been released. And I wondered if you'd seen this and what your take on it was.
I've seen the pictures and the short video. Thankfully, hats off to you for doing some due diligence there, because you're the one who let me know that these were originally filmed in June, I believe, not
And
recently.
someone Dan was talking to about it, and they sent
Okay.
over the emails and stuff, and that'll all remain private. Because it's not a big top secret thing. Just someone had reached out to say, "Look,
Yeah.
here's some information on it." So all I'll say is that. But yeah, that wasn't me necessarily. I just came across it. But yeah, other folks are, not just Dan either. Other folks out there are doing digging on this. Sorry, Tim, but I just don't like to take the
Oh,
credit
no.
for something I've not done.
Hats off to everybody, though. But I always said there is some good investigation in the UF community. And so, yeah, obviously you raised the question, why didn't this come out in June? Why is it just now kind of coming out? Did it come out in June, but nobody really picked up on it? And because you have these other drone incursions now in the UK, and this was at Manchester, we can kind of lump it in and kind of goes viral, which is not out the realm. As we know, the original Tic Tac video was shared many years before it became a thing, and
Yep.
nobody paid attention to it. So, that could be the case. I don't know. you know, I looked at it. You're right. The image is very clear. Obviously, this is not a drone of any sort that I'm familiar with. Frankly, you know, it's an orb or a balloon. You know, not not to make anybody mad with the balloon. Get mad for the balloon explanations, but if you're going to ask me what type of objects are able to sustain flight that are that shape, it's got to be something lighter than air, balloons, or something truly exotic. I don't know because we don't know. The short video that I saw, it looks like a balloon to me. You know, if we're just using the short video, the orb on the runway kind of looks like a balloon, but I don't know. You know, one of the things that's a mystery is the sequence of events. I know that it was reported
Yes.
that it was on the ground and then took off, like we're seeing there. So obviously, that wouldn't be a balloon. So,
But the
is that
frustration there, Tim, is we hear that really important piece, and I'm sure you're looking, going, okay, show me the video of the object being on the ground and then shooting off
and then
into the
go
air. And it's
right,
like, there isn't one, at least that we know of. And it's like,
right,
okay, so what I've got is an object, like you say, could be a balloon. There are some altered pictures where people have changed the colouring, saturation, and whatnot, and it makes the thing look a little bit more freaky than it could be. It could literally just be the way a piece of material is layered. And again, folks, I would love this to be an alien orb or drone or spacecraft. It's just what it might most likely be. And then, like you say, the object in the sky, you've where's that bit in the middle, and it's just the UFO conversation in general, isn't it? We always miss the piece in the middle.
and I'm somewhat jaded by that because you, I guess it'll be in this upcoming. You know, some may be aware that I have been appear on the History Channel's The Proof Is Out There, coming up on our fourth or fifth season. Been
Mm-hmm.
running a long time, and so we just wrapped up filming for the next season. It'll be coming out, so I guess spring of next year. We're about to start our next filming, but you know, this is what I do. They give me these videos, they give me images to analyze. This may be one because we'll pick that kind of stuff up. But I get jaded because I've seen some through them that I look at them and go, okay, this looks weird, but
Mm-hmm.
whoever the person has intentionally zoomed in to whatever this object is to create this effect that
Yeah.
doesn't look normal, but it's pixelated and everything, but that's an artifact of them zooming. Why did they do that? Why did they try to make it look more odd? There was, you know, a video that at first sight you look at it and go, wow, that's nuts, because this is something that's maneuvering completely unconventional. Now we're checking on my criteria, unconventional flight controls, and then you look at the bottom corner of the timestamp of the video, you realize, well, wait a damn minute, somebody sped this up, you know, 8 times, 10 times faster. So once you slow the video to real time, you go, this is a drone. You know, this is a drone. Why did someone intentionally speed it up? So that's where you get jaded, is just like you said, we're missing these key portions, and you go, but why? You know, why? You know, obviously, if you can take a still photograph on the tarmac, you could have taken a video of it going up as well. You know, why are we missing those key pieces? Because if the sequence of events is different, is this just a balloon? And actually, when we see it on the ground, it has come down. You know, I don't know.
Yeah.
You know, I don't know. Or is it's just difficult when you don't know the provenance and everything. Is the object that we saw on the ground, is that legitimate, or what was filmed just uh, the balloon in the sky, and somebody has since, you know, placed, use Photoshop or something, placed this ball-like
Yeah.
object? I don't know. I haven't done enough detailed analysis there, just to say that if everything is what people have said, it's interesting. Is the physical evidence there to provide that? No, and so I don't know.
Folks, if you're running late, no time for breakfast, and you're starving, we've all been there, racing to meetings, practice, school pickups, whatever it might be. But what if a delicious, nutritious meal could be ready in seconds? This podcast is sponsored by HUEL, HUEL. You could probably tell at this point. The world's #1 complete nutrition brand with over 400 million meals sold worldwide. Yep, that's right, 400 million. HUEL is trusted by people like you and me looking to fuel their days with convenient, complete nutrition. Try it for yourself with my exclusive offer for you. 15% off plus a free gift for new customers with the code ThatUFO at huel.com. Fuel your best with HUEL today. And this has come along for me, folks, at the right time. At the perfect time, really. I've been trying to get back on the health train again, and starting the day off well has been a bit of an issue. Between getting the kids ready for school, everything else you've got to do in a morning, a healthy breakfast just goes out the window. A bottle of HUEL means no prep, no time, and I can drink it on the go. I'm surrounded by some bottles here of the vanilla. However, the one I'm missing is the one that's gone first and fastest, and that's the chocolate flavour. The black edition ready to drink that's also got a huge 35 grams of protein in a bottle. HUEL is more than just a quick fix for breakfast, lunch, or dinner. It's a complete meal with all the nutrients you need to survive and thrive, with 27 vitamins and minerals packed into a serving. It's so easy for folks to put off a new regime or change up your diet after New Year. Get a head start now, folks. With small changes, get ahead of the pack. It's helping me. I'm sure it'll help you as well. I hope this has been useful. The links are below. But remember, folks, that's 15% plus a free gift for new customers with the code ThatUFO at huel.com. Unlock a healthier, easier way to eat with HUEL, nutritionally complete meals in minutes so you can focus on what really matters. Do
I
you
don't
know,
know.
on one hand, Tim, there's so many of these things now, and with the way that you've got all these AI/machine learning platforms, and CGI is so good now as well. It's so hard to disseminate fake from real when actually we still don't know what real looks like. Show me a picture of a real alien spacecraft. No one can do that yet. As much as there are some, I would go, that would be the likely candidates. We don't know. But on the other hand, at least it gives you that crowdsourcing online quick method. People like Dan and others who I've seen are researching this Manchester airport incident. I suppose lump myself into that because I know someone who's reasonably senior in air traffic control in the UK who can do some chasing up for me potentially. At least you'll get answers quickly. And I think we've seen that with, was it last year with the Palm Springs UFO? Jeremy Corbell had put some stuff online,
Yeah.
and within minutes, people had dates, locations, different angles, all that kind of stuff. And that kind of thing is really useful. So, as much as we're getting more stuff, you've got this online filter that, if you use it wisely, can be really useful as well. I think there's going to be some of the listener questions. We'll go back over some of the stuff we've talked about, Tim, and allow you to summarize some of those thoughts. But yeah, anything else on that?
Yeah, well, actually, before I forget, just to real briefly touch on the UK drone incursions in general again, because this was something that I've seen a lot online. Um, even good, legitimate outlets who I think have reported objectively and appropriately, like the War Zone, the Aviationist has done it. One of the things that's come up with that, just to add to the mystery, is there appears to be a lot of flight operations. So people have said, "Oh man, there's F-15s in the air. There's absolutely, the military bases are launching these aircraft to hunt these drones down." I'm a little dubious of that, and so they could be. And I think that especially with the F-15s, the sniper pods, the targeting pods that they used, and there were some aircraft that were supposedly in the air that have really good targeting pods, certainly could be used for hunting these drones down. But the question, I don't know because I'm not in the UK nor there those bases, is what is normal flight operations. For one thing, it's not quick and easy to launch aircraft. In peacetime, you don't have the pilots just sitting there in their flight suits waiting with the
Waiting,
plane.
yeah,
Yeah, so yeah,
yeah.
it takes, even in wartime. I think I've taught the pilots, and they're like, when we would get hot calls for ground contacts that they needed air support, we were talking about like a 45 minutes before we could be time on target.
It's not like
So
a taxi rank where all the taxis are lined up waiting on, okay, you four go. Yeah.
right. And so are these just air operations? Again, I live at a NATO air base that houses a fighter wing. All of those bases that we're talking about house different fighter wings. And I'll just tell you, there's constant airborne operations all the time. what is so? Are these just? Do these seem weird because you have more people right now looking at flight radar, looking at stuff, and like, oh wow, there's all this going on. I will tell you, you know, fairly regularly, I do look at the flight radars in the UK in particular because they run their ADS more. Here in Germany, the fighters don't run their ADS at all. You know, it's not uncommon for the E3s, the big, looks like a big UFO on top, the big NATO radar plane
Yeah,
just
yeah.
to pop up over here. And I'm like, oh shit, where did that come from? They don't run their ADSs here. And so I don't know enough about UK civil aviation versus German or anywhere else. Maybe they're stricter requirements, but the UK.
I'm quite near Newcastle Airport, Tim, and
Oh,
even if I do the school run or I'm driving to local shops and supermarkets, relatively regularly, I mean, constantly we will see commercial airliners going over because we're on the flight path. But
mhm.
pretty regular, we see massive bombers or huge military aircraft. And just the other day, there was one or two. And these things are like, they don't look like they can be in the air. They are so chunky and big and they make such a noise. Like, I will hear them here. I must be 15, 20 miles from the airport and I will hear
Mhm.
them, when they're taking off. So yeah, it's pretty regular, and we've had quite a lot recently as well. So um, it's very easy, I think, and this is where if people wonder why I don't have time, one, to spend all day online looking for this stuff, but then I don't have the
Oh,
time to go and dig into, like you say, how often does this military base actually do this kind of stuff? Did this happen last month, the month before, the month before? But on the other side of that, it makes it very easy for folks to go, oh, there was a sighting of a UFO. It was probably a drone. But let's forget that. Actually, there's been a couple of bases these things have happened, but they've happened in
mhm.
the past. Yeah, let's forget that. And also, there were a couple of F-15s in the air. So 2 + 2 = 4, when
Right.
actually that's not the equation.
Right. They just could be regular training flights. And even if you live outside one of these bases, I'll just tell you again, I live in one. It becomes normal and you tune it out. And so even when you hear these drone incursions, you start paying more attention. Yeah, like I don't even pay attention to when the F-16s here are taking off or when we have the F-35s come in sometimes because they make a different sound. You're like, what is
Mm.
that? That's unusual, but you just get accustomed to it. Prior to here living in the States, like we lived outside Fort Stewart, which is an Army base, big tank, the 3rd Infantry Mechanized, artillery tanks. Um, you had a lot of aviation units, and we would have family or friends that would come in from out of town and visit. They'd be like, "Holy shit!" Because there's helicopters flying 1,000 feet over your house. We were right over the flight line. Or when they were doing artillery workups, I mean, literally the windows of your house would shake. For me and my wife and we're like, "What are you talking about?" Oh yeah, you just don't even like you just get used to it. So then, if
Yeah.
you start, even if you live outside of these bases, you start paying attention. It may seem unusual, but it may be stuff you tune out. So I don't know. That's not to say that uh, you know they haven't launched aircraft, or maybe they already had training in place, and they're like, "Hey, while you're up there, use your targeting pods." But I'm not. I'm not totally sold on the fact that there's been large airborne operations launched just for these drone incursions. Maybe they have, but I would just say that those bases in the UK tend to be very, very active. Every time I've looked, very, very active.
Yeah, let's get to some listener questions, Tim.
Okay.
Loads of them sent in at very short notice, and I do mean a huge amount. So thank you, everyone. Some of them might be quite summarising because we've gone over it already. Others ask your opinion on different stuff. And what I've really enjoyed with this, and what I think people will see in the listener questions, is you get a bit of education and context with Tim's experience in investigative journalism, his background, where he lives now, as to what situations like this might be, not only for these incursions, but going forward. I think it allows you to better set up an opinion, because
Mhm,
I won't speak for Tim, but I truly believe there are many instances of events and stuff like this. For example, Malmstrom back in the day, where
mhm,
something anomalous was over that base doing something incredibly weird.
mhm.
I don't think that was China or Russia, but
Right.
that doesn't mean every other instance has to be alien, non-human, whatever that might be.
Right.
So Tom asks, and I thought this was a good one to start with. Tim, I have a high degree of trust for the reporting coming from the debrief and simply want to know, what does your gut tell you as to the source of these incursions? Shoot me straight if you want to just summarize that.
Sure. Again, I just want to make sure I qualify that this is just my gut. I don't have any evidence to back this up other than having followed and looked at, a lot of these other drone incursions, not just in the UK right now, but across the world. And if I had to give kind of my assessment, I would say these are very likely drones, very likely of Russian backing to some sort and degree. Um, and in fact, I don't have it in front of me, but last time we had these drone incursions in the UK, maybe a year or two ago, I think a Russian national actually got arrested or detained for one of them. So this is not uncommon. And just to further add the suspicion for me behind Russia is people may not be aware of it because this has not been largely reported, but the NATO European intelligence services have been sounding alarms and warnings for about the past year about Russian sabotage at facilities, military bases, and different defense facilities. We've had some suspicious fires. There's been one. The UK government actually made some arrests where there were some plots to commit sabotage on facilities in the UK by Russian agents. So it just all kind of, if I had to give my general opinion, I think that's what we're looking at. These are very likely, I would say with a high degree of certainty, these are human source origin, likely foreign government, very, in my opinion, likely Russian backed. And it's just from par for the course. People may be unfamiliar, but July of this year, all the bases, all foreign bases here in Europe, went to the highest degree of readiness and alert level since September 11th. So since the terrorist attacks, they went to the highest degree of alert for a brief period because there was intelligence that Russia was planning some sabotage operations. So I mean, it's kind of the new world that we live in, and so that would be my assessment. And my advice to anybody in those areas is to keep that open mind and consider that potential impossibility. And so instead of just assuming aliens, you could also be a hero because perhaps you see somebody in a field near your house in a van that you're like, what are they doing? Pay attention to the ground as well. You may be able to catch some Russian spies.
Literally, as we're talking, Tim, the Express in the UK has an article out where the orb is definitely UFO as aliens monitor Earth's air bases, claims expert. And that is that British UFO expert and filmmaker Mark Christopher Lee has asserted the image of a mysterious orb at Manchester Airport, they confirmed back in June, are unequivocally evidence of a UFO and that it's aliens. So, yeah, just so we know, I would like to think on this podcast, I'm reporting both sides of the arguments. Tim, you're thinking Russia. Mark and the Express going with, aliens. So maybe it's somewhere in the middle.
Could be. You're right.
Yeah. Breaking news, folks. Shez asks, is it just happening, and you alluded in this, but there's a little bit more detail. Is it just happening at US bases or bases where the US have a presence? Is it more widespread? Are there reports coming out of India or African countries?
I haven't heard any in Africa or India, other than you have had, I am absolutely aware of some Indian incidences where they were unequivocally determined to be Chinese drones because some of those drones were recovered. There's actually, there's a funny story behind that. I'll share real briefly because I didn't have enough that I could really write on it. There wasn't enough. You write like a 2-paragraph article, but they did earlier this past year. They had some drone incursions in India. They were able to recover one of the drones, and being here in Europe and the UK, different time zone. So I'm like, cool. So I called the Indian border guard who recovered it, and they said, oh yeah, we recovered it. It's Chinese drone. We turned it over to the CIA. And I went, I'm sorry, the CIA who? The CIA, like the Central Intelligence, because for those who aren't aware, CIA says nothing. Never talk like we were not there. So
yeah,
it does appear that the CIA recovered a Chinese drone in India, and they probably erroneously confirmed that to me because they don't talk. Because of course the CIA was like, I don't know what you're talking about, of course. But I think that these are definitely they're definitely more widespread than people realize. There are certainly occurring much more in Europe than people realize. That's where I've predominantly seen them, is in Europe, Sweden in particular, Poland, Germany, France, Belgium, Italy, Romania are all ones that I know for certain. Um, and so it's predominantly there, but I know we've had some other drone stuff in the Pacific as well. I think in Guam, they've had some that are likely. We've had some that are undeniably Chinese origin. We've had drones where they will fly over Taiwan and film. And ironically enough, we know that because they have shared these videos in Chinese servers of them flying over Taiwan. So it is occurring kind of all over the place. But in connection where we're looking at the UK, it very much matches this similar pattern in Europe. And to that last point, no, it's not just U.S. facilities. I know of at least two German bases that are only German, and then a lot of the ones in France, Sweden, and then just recently in Germany were over nuclear facilities. So secure sites, but not necessarily always military.
Yeah, I think most drones, if you turn them over, say made in China. So I'm guessing there's more investigation goes into knowing the origin. When I spoke to Brian Bender a few weeks ago, journalist you'll know from Politico and other publications, he mentioned there was drone swarms being released from container ships out at sea, which obviously these things don't have to take off in China and fly across the ocean.
That was the German assessment for the ones that were just recently in Brunsbüttel. So over the nuclear side, the German government, God bless them, I give it to them. They're one of the most open governments I've ever dealt with. PIO. Sweden's another good one. Sweden sent me a handwritten letter with a signature on it. That was a first for me. But in contrast to UK and US, who are pretty tight-lipped, the German government tends to be very open, and they flat out said that their assessment was the ones over Brunsbüttel were of Russian origin being launched from a container ship, Russian controlled container ship. So civilian ship, incognito. And this was, Brunsbüttel is much closer to the coast. So it's right on the coast. So that would make sense. Whereas I don't know the exact differences from some of these bases. I guess if you had good high power drones, you still could launch them. And they would evade. Just so people, it goes back to that. Yeah, but our air defenses, that's part of the beauty of these drone systems is they fly so low, they fly under the radar.
Yeah.
And so you're able to get there. So yeah, no, I think Bender's absolutely correct. We definitely have seen evidence of that.
Russell says, having such an interest in the topic of UAP, we need to be cautious about jumping to conclusions, but surely adequate countermeasures should be available if they were conventional drones, be it radio signal blocking or deployment of chaff that would bring such vehicles down. Again, do you want to just summarise why that's probably not being done?
It's just unfortunate. I mean, the assumption there is a great assumption, and it should be. Don't get me wrong. And I think if you dig into military, I would tell anybody who's really, really fascinated in it to dig into past reports from really good think tanks like RAND or different national security publications about the vulnerabilities of unmanned aerial systems. And the bottom line is all governments are very vulnerable to them. And we don't, unfortunately, have really great anti-drone measures that are just all the time up at any given time, especially some of the ones are, some of these drones are maybe designed so they counter some of those measures, because electronic jamming is a great way. We've seen that in Ukraine where they've actually been able to take control of Russian drones. We've seen in Israel as well, where they'll take control of them and move them. Those frequencies change, it's hard, it's encrypted, and so you've got to kind of already have an idea of what you're dealing with and reverse engineer it first before you do that. And so there really is not, we do not have where we need the best counter drone stuff, where the cutting edge counter drone stuff that they have right now. So laser technology, that type of stuff, where that is in the field, where it is being operated and it is being field tested, is actually in the Middle East. So we don't see them. If those field tests are successful and that kind of stuff, could we see them placed at facilities in the near future? Sure. But where we're at right now and the ability to have permanent fixed air defenses against counter drones. Unfortunately, it's not there.
Peter says, "Hi Andy, could you ask Tim if he thinks the drone flap currently happening around the Air Force bases in the UK could be a red team test of defences and response? Could you just clear up what a red team is?"
Sure, yeah, red team. Basically, this means that these are friendly forces. These are design training exercises. So in this case, the U.S. or the U.K. is engaged in design training where they're testing the base's vulnerabilities. So they're launching them. They're testing the base response, and then they come back and say, "Hey, this is where you guys screwed up." So they're designed to help bases improve their testing. Probably not. We do. So I have seen red team testing at overseas military bases here. We always know when they're going on because I mean that's one of the things that's important for people to realize is that it's hard to do that stuff completely in secret because these bases, um, they're not just military bases; they're communities. People live
Mm.
there. There's lots of housing. There's grocery stores. There's restaurants. There's malls. Um, and so, we do these. I mean, annually, every base does readiness testing. That's usually, and they let everybody know that this is going on. And so, I've seen drones fly up. I've seen mock soldiers trying to infiltrate the base and getting arrested. I've been on the phone with people on base, and suddenly the loudspeakers are going off saying incoming. That there's a missile threat, and people are like, "Holy shit! Is everything okay?" Yeah, yeah. No, don't worry about it. It's just a test. we're just testing air defenses. They'll launch planes and all this stuff. All the activity, including the launching of planes and their drone activity, could be consistent with all base readiness red team testing. However, I would fully expect those bases. The statements would be, "Don't worry," like you would
Sure.
know ahead of time. We're doing readiness testing at these bases. So, um, very rarely, only on one instance, um, ironically enough, just this year. And to give you an idea of how much this is an issue and how well ingrained it is for people who stay on foreign bases, uh, my elementary school kids, were on the playground and a drone flew over and was like over the playground. And so the kids are like, "Ah, danger, danger." And, the teachers and everything, security forces got alerted and they said, "Okay, yeah, no, thanks. Everybody did the right thing, but this was an authorized drone flight." So that's the only
Okay.
time I've seen something where you didn't know beforehand, but they immediately said, "No, no, don't worry about it. Everything's cool." But in this case, when they're saying we don't know and there's no base readiness assigned training, I would say that's probably unlikely.
Awesome. Ken asks, "Are there any of these objects displaying performance that is beyond existing capabilities of UAV or drone technology we know of? It seems inconceivable that these drones would be allowed to operate. What strategy is enabling this, or are we genuinely unable to bring them down?" I think that second part's been answered multiple times now. But the first part, have they displayed any performance that we know of?
Not that I'm aware of. I mean, what I've talked to, when I've talked to military people, both spokesmen officially and on background, so unofficially, they've said, "No, these are quadcopters." They've not seen anything other than they're able to, they're certainly not your off the shelf drones per se, because they are able to overfly GPS protected airspace, and they are tend to be flying at higher altitudes and at longer periods of time. But I've not heard anything that I could say that is. I could say definitely the veracity of the claims are certain. That would say they exceed any of the capabilities of drone technology. We're getting, I mean, and I think one of the things, this happened at Langley as well, where one of the reports is that you can hear them. They sound like lawnmowers, flying lawnmower. We
Yeah,
heard these from
that buzz. Yeah.
that's a fuel, so gasoline driven drones, so not electric driven drones. So those are, you get more power, higher flight altitudes, longer flight time. But then again, that sound, people probably not many, but some who were still around 80 years ago probably remember the same thing from the old V1 rockets during the World War II. They sound like lawnmowers and they'd shut off, and so these are fuel driven drones.
I'm going to change up this question because you've answered the question, but the context behind it, I think there's another question to be asked. So Human Neutrino says, given that NATO is toe-to-toe with Russia, the mainstream media seem to be taking a very blasé attitude to a US airbase getting buzzed by unknown drones. So I'll just ask off the back of that, why do you think the media isn't more all over this story than it seems to be?
I think ironically, they have. Well, let me put it this way: they've covered a lot more than any of these other drone incursions.
Sure.
I think when we had the drone incursions um, here in Germany at the beginning of the year, I think the article I put out about it by the debrief was the only, may still be the only Western English speaking outlet to cover it. And so, in fact, you have seen even just basically a regurgitation of the press releases by the New York Times or other outlets is actually, believe it or not, more significant. Um, it, I think what the question there people are asking is why haven't there been more, why haven't we seen journalists out there in the field staking out the flights, that kind of stuff? Um, I don't know, other than because it is in the UK. The UK appetite for UAPs or this kind of stuff is pretty slim. They don't. This is not something they typically cover, and it kind of whole cold hard truth is there's a lot of shit going on nowadays.
Yeah,
And so it's hard to cover it all. It's always, the cycle is constantly changing.
yeah. Stephen says if these were drones, then they would know whose they were, where they were coming from, and how to disable them, and the mainstream media would be all over it. These are UAP, and they know it. Would you agree? I think you know the answer from both of us here. Stephen's going to be no. Tim, do you want to just again slightly expand on why it's a no?
Yeah, I have not heard or seen anything that would suggest that they require an anomalous or UAP or what I call UAP. And just to clarify that, for me, UAP is kind of synonymous for UFO, meaning something that's really anomalous. I've not seen anything that would suggest that. And again, we've kind of touched on all the things that people maybe consider anomalous. Just the mere fact they're able to fly over these bases seems anomalous, but it's not. And so I've not seen anything that. But so nobody gets mad, for the sake of my Twitter mentions, I'm certainly open to it. I'm always open to it. And, we get that really good video with we've got good background on it that it's performed. We see an object performing in some way that's inconsistent with drones. I'm open to it, but everything I've seen and heard thus far is not anomalous to me.
Yeah, and I'll just say Richard, Michael, The Hive, Ronnie, Parrot, Paul, all the questions you've sent in, thank you so much. We've kind of answered them in the body of the interview and with the other listener questions. And everyone else who sent in a question, we've either not gotten to it or it's genuinely been covered. And we can only have Tim repeat the same thing so many times. Would have loved to have come on here and said, oh, yeah, UFO, UAP. But I would just say, before I hand over to Tim for another question, just always kind of take a step back with these things, look at multiple news sources. As much as it would be lovely to look at something and go, this person is reporting UFO, UAP, try and look at the broader conversation and even look at some other folks' opinions you might not necessarily agree with. Tim is someone who I do generally, so I quite enjoyed to see his post at the time, and so many folks were jumping all over this as anomalous. To see someone like Tim say, no, I don't see it, because in my head I was saying the same thing, and I know others were too.
I would just say, my word of caution to people, it would be always be cautious to pundits, outlets, or personalities who are selling popcorn, meaning they're just always selling you the popcorn to the show. They're always like, if somebody's always telling you what you want to hear, if you're somebody who's really into the UAP topic and you genuinely believe that there is anomalous or non-human origin to these things, and somebody is always selling you that it is, I'd be wary of that, because these aren't all. And just by the law of averages here, it wouldn't be all of that. So just be cautious there. If somebody's always selling you an alien, they might be selling you just popcorn to enjoy a show and not really anything objective or truthful.
Do you know, Tim, if I had more time, I would have a T-shirt released for this with a UK Drone Incursion Tour 2025, 2024, and I'd have
Yeah,
like Lakenheath, Mildenhall, Feltwell, and Fairford all on there, like
yeah.
a band tour T-shirt, folks. So if anyone wants to steal that idea, get out there and make themselves some money. Go for it,
Yeah.
and at least you're advertising the truth. A final question though from Stephen, which takes us probably nicely back to the UFO conversation. Are there any technologies Tim expects to be announced in 2025 that are game changing, either for UAP or in general?
Oh, that's a good question. That's a real good question. I mean, we cover a lot of game changing, disruptive technologies in the debrief that are always early stage type stuff. So the earliest stage they get to. And we've covered some really interesting propulsion technologies. We've covered some interesting um, different kind of flight systems. Now, whether they will come into fruition in 2025 or not, I don't know. Whether they'll ever come to fruition. I mean, that's part of the problem. There's a lot of great ideas, but they just don't come to light because they never pan out for whatever reason, logistically or even. Uh, the best and most exciting disruptive stuff starts as those prototypes, and sometimes prototypes are just that. Like they don't make
Yeah.
it past that small concept stage. So um, I'm not familiar. Nothing is coming to the top of my head that I would go, hey, be on the lookout for this in 2025, other than expect to see uh, unmanned aerial systems continue the rise that we've seen in the past couple of years, and the integration of AI with them is
Mm.
big. We're seeing a lot of that. So the ability to have autonomous control, we're going to see a lot more of that kind of stuff.
And there's a couple of things we've not really got to, but if you could just share a few thoughts on the Immaculate Constellation document, Tim, that was sent into Congress.
Sure. Yeah, I don't know what to make of it. There's certainly, I wrote a big write up on it. And so people always want you to be like, okay, is it true? Is it not true? Tell me what, get, lay me your hands, your cards on the table, and you being like, I don't know. People hate that because they want me or others to have the answers. And like I said, if you've got somebody that claims to have all the answers, I'd be wary of that. I did a big write up on that, and what probably frustrated people is my big write up on it was saying, hey, look, from a procedural and legal standpoint, could something like this exist? Yeah, it could. It absolutely could, because of the executive branch and how classification and secrets are kind of controlled in the U.S. And I won't get in the weeds of that. Anybody's welcome to read that article. But the article where people get upset is I go back and forth and go, could something like Immaculate Constellation exist? Yes, the mechanisms are there. My opinion, yes, I can support that. And in fact, after writing that article, I heard from high level people in government who said, no, you're spot on that this could exist, and even said, the president, executive branch exercise plenary authority, which means absolute authority over this type of stuff. So, could the Immaculate Constellation kind of program as it was described exist? Sure. Does it exist? I don't know. The document that was released, when you're looking at the different kind of sightings and things that are supposedly on classified servers and different image and video evidence, do I believe that those could exist? Yeah, I think they could. Probably do. And so it's an interesting document. I was initially dismissive of it. I talked to some people who would know more, and they just said, I wouldn't outright dismiss it. I wouldn't outright dismiss it. They knew, I don't know, but they knew who Michael Schellenberger's source was. They knew what that, and they said, I wouldn't totally dismiss it. So it's intriguing, but Can I say for
So
a fact that it exists? I don't know.
there may be some fire with the smoke, but you can't be certain.
Can't be certain, and because again, this is not. I don't know the source. I've not interviewed the source. I can't verify all of their claims. I can just say, could some of their claims in the way that they say that they exist, could they exist? Sure. Yeah. Yep. And I think more of that'll make more sense when I say once I finally get around to publishing the article about what happened with David Grusch's uh, IA investigation. That might make a little more sense. I'll say that.
Fair enough. The role of Arrow now, it's been largely dismissed in the past. Got a new director, John Kozlowski. Dr. John Kozlowski had a mixed reaction to his Senate hearing appearance. But do you still think Arrow is, as a body, has any input positively for the UAP UFO topic going forward?
I've heard nothing but good things about their new director. I will say that for the record. I have not spoken with him, never had any past contact with him, so I don't know firsthand, but people that I know who have worked with him uh, on this topic um, and in different contexts have had nothing but good things to say about him. I think people maybe get disappointed because he hadn't come out and said, "Yes, we got the crashed alien craft, we've got the
Yeah.
bodies, we've got that." Um, but I think from what I know, you know, I think it's he from what I've been told, I think he is a good extension of Jay Stratton, who was the first,
Yeah.
obviously, UAP task force. Um, and I'll be happy to say on record from everyone I've ever talked to around that time and what I know about that time. And Jay Stratton did a phenomenal job and has continued to be one of the most impressive people, in my opinion, who's ever done the topic um, in the government space. And so the new director follows in that lineage. But in saying that, again, it goes back to what we're talking about, the UK incursions, all this stuff. Jay Stratton has always impressed me the most because of what he has discussed and hadn't discussed relative to some of these events and everything. They may not be what people want to hear all the time. Like it's
Yeah.
always impressed me more when it's been like, do we have Roswell request recovery? I don't know. I haven't seen any evidence for that. Is there alien implants? And it's like, no, that's nonsense. We don't have any of that. And you're going, okay. Sometimes the people who are willing to go, yeah, no, that part is nonsense. They're not selling you popcorn. And so I think that this new director is kind of an extension of that same mindset going into Arrow that Jay Stratton took, which I think will be promising for people. It just maybe is not what they want to hear right now.
I think, yeah, ultimately down the line, we could still end up. I think what most folks want, if not everyone involved in the topic, is confirmation you've got something that isn't human interacting with us, whatever that might look like. Just because, and let's just use Roswell, Betty and Barney Hill, the Phoenix Lights, all turn out to be non stories. If you still end up with the answer being, yeah, we've got a non human presence here, that's fine. The answer and the journey to it might not be what you expect, but you still might all end up at the same place.
Yeah, and we don't. Been saying this for years. The ultimate conclusion, which I largely side on, is it may just be life, reality, the universe. Shit's weirder than we give it credit, and it's maybe very hard to put some of these things in a neat box.
Yeah.
Of alien, non-human intelligence, whatever. Like there's a lot of similar names for it. But that lack of information, that lack of really hardline based truth leaves you with belief, the necessary for belief.
Yeah.
And so things become difficult then. I don't know. I'm still on the hill in case somebody's curious that do I believe there are weird things out there that do not comport to normal human made or whatever you want to determine technology. Yeah, I've heard enough stories, enough things that from people I really trust, and they have no reason to be lying or making it up. Many who have never gone public, that I'm like, Yeah, there's something weird here, but qualifying what that is, aliens,
Maybe it's
interdimensional.
maybe it's the planet's alive and it's making white blood cell type things to get rid of the human virus. Yeah, who knows what it is, but
That, us covering, UAP is a very small portion of what the debrief covers, but us
yeah,
covering science, physics, and space news and all these other news outlets, there's a lot of weird shit.
yeah.
There's a lot of weird stuff. There's a lot of unexplained things, even in what people would consider hard sciences. When you get into quantum mechanics and physics and stuff, there's a lot we don't know.
Tim, speaking of some of that weird shit, how about the Nazca mummies story, which has come and gone and come and gone and come and gone? It's certainly hanging around, right? And I outright dismissed it, and then I went to a place of maybe in all of this, there's something there. Maybe not the whole thing, but maybe an element of it. And I've kind of sat on that fence of, I'll keep an eye on it from a distance because wouldn't this be cool if this was the shit we found a cave with the bodies? But,
Sure. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. I'm probably on the bad side there where I've dismissed it and hadn't paid much attention to it. So I don't know what the new. I kind of just saw
a lot of
the
folks have done the same. And do you know what? And I know a few folks listening to this who are really invested in the story. I'm not as close to it as I was maybe months ago. There are still small elements of the proving government's involvement in trying to study the bodies. And I hear in the background there are serious scientists who don't want to come public but would like to study it. I don't think that was always made available to them as easily as maybe some folks who have the materials would make out it was being made available to them, which is probably an issue. I think money's involved there, always is, isn't it?
Mhm.
However, yeah, I'm one of those
I,
where that I'd be happy to be proven wrong with it.
sure. Well, yeah, when I say I had dismissed it initially, I just want to be abundantly clear. Do I think that scientists, that legitimate scientists, independent review scientists, should look into it to either prove, disprove, or whatever we're looking at? Absolutely. I mean, that's one of the most frustrating things for me in general, and we see this in all the sciences again when we cover it. Is these forbidden sciences? Not to take a cliche, but we especially see this in archaeology. My colleague Micah Hanks could speak to this endlessly, where people find evidence of things that don't match up or comport with what the paradigm is
Yeah,
for conventional archaeology, and they're dismissed and I mean, the academic community is like a mob. Like they will, if you bring up stuff that doesn't match different timelines or doesn't match, when civilization existed at this point or wherever, people get dismissed. But there's some good evidence there, and it's very frustrating for me. I don't think that you should outright dismiss it. I'm just not a geneticist. I don't have the qualified background, but I certainly think. I mean, this goes back to the kind of like the cattle mutilations, which I don't pay a lot of attention to. But I'm going, well, there's physical evidence here. Like if we've got physical evidence, what's the harm here? So I don't. But where I don't know is, has the physical evidence been made available to independent scientists, that type of stuff? Because unfortunately, a lot of these times, this stuff isn't made available to people,
yeah.
which makes you question.
Do you, do you know what I should probably mention there? You mentioned cattle mutilations. I was about to have Chris O'Brien on the podcast, who just passed away a couple of days ago.
I
Researcher,
didn't know.
he was having some medical difficulties, and upon driving to the hospital, it looks like he's had an accident, and yeah,
Oh,
he's
geez.
passed away. I was literally just in touch with him the day before, speaking to him via email as well. So real shame. And also Emily
Oh,
Trim, who was one of the witnesses from the Aerial School phenomenon documentary. She's just passed away of cancer
oh.
in the brain. So bit of and Howard Hughes, obviously the week before I'd mentioned, UK broadcaster, he passed away. Tim, I think you were on Howard Hughes Unexplained previously. I'm not sure.
I'm not sure. I don't recall. No.
Can't remember, but Howard Hughes interviewed a lot of folks in this space, and yeah, so it's been a bad week for kind of losing researchers and folks involved in the space and the topic, and I'm probably missing out folks there as well. But to move forward into the future, Tim, and finish up, where do you hopefully see to give us a bit of positivity, hopefully, the UAP UFO topic going in 2025?
Oh man, I've almost given up on giving predictions now because it's never never pans out like I hope. Both bad and good. Sometimes the good. Sometimes I'm surprised. And so to a certain degree, I have allowed myself not to follow as intimately or make any good predictions because I like being pleasantly surprised. Um, so I don't know. I certainly I could
It,
sell popcorn here and
yeah.
say, man, there's some new video, there's some new movies that are gonna be coming out, and a bunch of whistleblowers are gonna be coming forward. I don't know. I know
Well,
that.
I'm not going to spoil. If you're going to give me a non-answer, I'll push you on something else then from before, okay?
Okay,
Which I
yeah.
appreciate. Your David Grusch article that's going to be coming out, and I know you keep this stuff close to your chest. You do a lot of hard work and a lot of effort goes into these things. Um, is that a story that people are going to see differently once your article's published?
No, unfortunately, and that's where we kind of stand because where can you give people, how can you push the ball forward or probably a bad term because people say push the ball forward mean disclosure. How are you going to move the ball forward? That's not my job. It shouldn't be anybody who objectively does it. It should just be to present information. Um, but in particular, how do you get to some of the core of what David Grush's claims are? And I think ultimately there we're just going to be left with more questions than answers yet again, where you're like, son of
Yeah.
a, could somebody at least come out and say, absolutely not, this is total nonsense, or, hey, there's something to this. And, but I'll just say that the reason that the resolution that you said there does tie into uh, some of the stuff that was mentioned in Immaculate Constellation, those documents. Those are don't dismiss them and find them a little intriguing because there is some bleed in from those.
Awesome. Well, Tim, awesome speaking with you. Always as. Shouldn't
Always.
leave it as long as we do. I could do this weekly or monthly with you if you were ever free. But to be honest, if you want to just let folks know, you wouldn't want to do that. You're too busy. But if you are looking to let folks know how they can get in touch with you, how they can find your work, and of course that of the debrief.
Sure, yeah, yeah. Always, feel free to check us out at thedebrief.org. Um, New stuff constantly coming out, not always UAP, but definitely lots of stuff that even if you're just interested in UAP topic, you're going to broaden your horizons because we're constantly talking about the cutting edge technologies of physics and science that's out there. That's our focus. I'm on Twitter. I'm not nearly as active as I used to be. Twitter is the only social media I'm on, but I guess it's getting better now that the U.S. election's over with, but it turns into a cesspool there. And always from about September till December, I tend to be somewhat silent anyway because it's football season. So I hope that doesn't upset any UFO people. But being a big football fan, my Twitter tends to be sports Twitter for those months. But you can find me at LT Tim McMillan at LT Tim McMillan on Twitter. Um, DMs are always open. So if you've got what you want to break the case wide open, feel free to reach out there or at Tim at thedebrief.org is my email. And so if you're listening to this and are like, no, I've got this, Tim. If you'll back it up, investigate it, I sure will. I'll look into it. So feel free to reach out at any of those.
And listen, it's been great speaking to Tim because of all that stuff. Like I say, what the debrief covers is a lot of really interesting stuff from defense, science, physics, like you say. But the UAP, UFO stuff's the big thing for me and most folks listening to this. But it does tie in. And I
Mhm.
would just urge people to be able to look at the conversation, and you don't have to be disappointed that people say something isn't a UFO in the terms of it being an alien.
Absolutely. And to plug our own outlet, I would just say I think that if just the UAP topic is something you're intimately interested in, I would encourage people to also broaden their horizons. And a lot of the articles that we publish there are going to make you more intelligent and be able to have good, educated conversations with people. Because when we're covering, like, hey, here's the latest material science and metamaterials that's going in to try to develop hypersonic aircraft. Well, now when you have a report of a UAP that's moving at mock whatever, you can go, and somebody goes, oh, that's going to be a drone. You can go, oh, no, 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 wait a minute. I know because I just read this article that
Yeah.
here's where we are with material science. Here's where we're at here. That's not going to work. And so, I've always encouraged people to broaden their horizons. And then probably one of the things I'm most well known for on Twitter and everything when it comes to this is being able to, I'm always willing to help give some people some bureaucratic insight to how the government works, what makes sense and doesn't make sense, secrecy
Yeah.
wise.
And if anything does come up that people think we've missed in terms of this UK drone incursion, any evidence that you think actually this is worth having a look at, send over to Tim, send over to myself, and we'll have a browse.
Yep.
Awesome.
Sounds good.
Tim, so good speaking with you, mate, and hopefully host you again very soon.
Always. Yep.
That is all for this episode. Thank you very much for tuning in. Don't forget to leave the podcast a review on your chosen platform. Apple and Spotify do make a huge difference to the algorithm. If you're checking the show out on YouTube, please don't forget to like and leave a comment on here as well. Any sharing you do is very much appreciated on any social media platform. And finally, you can listen to shows ad-free and sponsor-free in their glorious full versions by subscribing for less than the price of a coffee on Apple, Spotify. Just search That UFO Podcast Premium. YouTube, you can sign up and be a member, or you can do that through patreon.com. Thank you very much for listening, folks.
It wasn't a tic-tac and not quite a saucer, more like a hubcap designed by Chaucer, a little baroque and quite steampunk, like Alice was playing bass for the Parliament of Folk. The little fucker hovered right outside of my window, and when I shoved out the screen, he made it an issue. I don't think he expected me to see his ass, but I'd had some champagne and smoked a little grass.